Hey everyone, Todd Schutte here with the Bona e-learning team.
And I'm D. Linston with the Tech and Training team.
We want to welcome everybody to what's the first in a monthly series of Bona training webinars that we're going to put together and take a deeper dive into some of the products and processes that we go through in our live training and that's in our e-learning platform. We thought this would just be another good format to get together with all of our customers and colleagues and go back through some of the things that help make us successful when we're putting products down out in the field. So this first session is going to be on Bona sealers, in particular the ones that have added color to them, namely AmberSeal, NordicSeal, and NaturalSeal. And it's not that these products are a lot more difficult to put down, but because you have added color, there's just some certain watch outs, some best practices that if you follow, you'll have a lot more success. Really reduce any repairs and stuff you have between coats, and enjoy putting these products down. And they really add to the creativity of what you can do out there in the field. So knowing how to use these products can be important to just upselling and offering your customers some different things that maybe your competitors are not. So as we were putting this video together on the demonstration, we went through our commandments and we found out that all 12 of them really play into being successful with these products. A little surprising because usually not all of them play into a product or a process, but all of them did. So we thought this would be a great chance to go back through them, highlight some of the things and how they relate to applying these additional pigment sealers, and then we'll go on from there. So Dee, why don't you start us off with the first commandment?
So the first commandment is expectations. And it really is important that you discuss the expectations with your customer, especially when you're dealing with a product that has color to it. So understand the homeowner's expectations and make sure you can then go in and deliver that promise.
Commandment 2 is know thy species. So whether on white oak like we are here today, or Brazilian cherry, or maple, or take your pick, and what kind of grain pattern do you have. So the important thing about knowing your species is knowing how these products with color are going to affect the overall look. Is it going to make everything blend in? Is it going to make things pop out? Knowing what that final look is going to be depending on how many coats of these products you tend to put down, what the finish is you're putting over the top, and again, kind of blending in with what Dee said about expectations. Is this what your customer is also expecting from their floor and the system that you're proposing to put on?
Commandment 3 and 4 we're going to tie in together, which has to do with the environment. Temperature, relative humidity, as well as airflow really plays a big role in how well the products are going to lay out. It's important to control what you can, meaning the HVAC system, shut that down when it's time to put the products down. In regards to temperature and relative humidity, it's important that you know that the higher the temperature, the lower the humidity. That's going to cause the products to flash off faster. Whereas the higher the humidity, the lower the temperature, that may work to your advantage and give you more working time. In regards to airflow, it's important that you have dead airspace when you're putting these products down. That way, being a water-based product, you don't have as much time as you do with an oil-based product, and you want to give yourself a chance to be able to put the products down, allow them to level and flow out. So shutting that HVAC system off would be highly recommended. Actually, it is recommended to be your most important thing to do. That way the product has a chance to level and flow out.
Then we come up to commandment 5, which is read the directions. I know everybody's an adult for the most part. Everybody's been doing this, or a lot of you guys have been doing this for a long time. But if you've got a new product, read the directions. You may find some hints, tips, tricks, some key information like NordicSeal, NaturalSeal have white pigment in them. And or for your technicians, if they're the ones that are going to be putting the product down, maybe more important for them to read the directions. You can come watch videos, on our YouTube professional channel, on our e-learning platform. You can call the tech and training guys. You can call your territory manager. Read the directions. Get more information about a new product before you jump into a difficult job.
Commandment number 6 is floor prep. We're not just sanding the floor, but we're preparing the surface. And part of preparing that surface is making sure you burnish that wood close. You really want to tighten up that wood grain so that you have minimum amount of that water-based sealer soaking into the floor and more sitting on top to provide a nice build layer. Part of that floor prep hard plating, not screening. Screening will leave a floor open, which will allow a lot more of that water-based seal coat to soak in. So make sure using the Temp brush, highly recommended. That way you're brushing out that soft grain, and that's going to help minimize how much grain raise you have. But really think of it as you're preparing the surface and not just sanding the floor.
Great. Then we go to number 7, which is feather, feather, feather. Again, with any product that has added color to it, so whether it's these sealers, whether you're doing a glaze where you've mixed paint with the product, tints, dyes, whatever, you've got to be able to skillfully feather those products out. Otherwise, you're going to have stop-start marks all over the place. You're going to have marks, a different color next to the wall where you're cutting in. That's a different color than your field. You've got to be able to feather everything out and control and even out that application rate with the tools that you're using.
Commandment number 8, keeping the floor clean. It's important that you do a good job of minimizing how much airborne dust you may be having, or debris that may be on the floor. Using dust containment equipment would be key. Vacuuming and tacking around the perimeter as well as in the field. And again, using that Temp brush is a way of helping to keep that floor clean and setting yourself up for that next step for the finish coats.
And then once we decide we're going to actually put product on, we've got application rate with the particular tools that we're going to be using. We recommend for these products that you use a T-bar and the cut-in pad. Again, the lightweight T-bar, and we can't stress enough, just use fingertip pressure. When you're using those applicators, you're putting that product on, let the applicator do the metering for you and ensure a consistent coat. If you're putting pressure on that applicator, you can't keep consistent pressure across the floor when you're feathering in. So just fingertip pressure. Know what tools you're using. Make sure that whether I'm doing the main floor with T-bar and the cut-in pad, that I'm putting them on at the same application rate, or especially if we've got 2 people, that whoever's doing the T-bar, whoever's cutting in, same application rate, or we're going to have 2 different looks in different spots in the floor.
Commandment number 10, mix your product. It's important that you take the time to mix the product correctly. Different manufacturers have different recommendations when it comes to mixing the product, whether it's stirring the product, shaking the product, or mixing the product vigorously, or rocking it back and forth. Dealing with a product that has color in it, it's important to keep that color mixed in there well by getting a good shake on there. And then if you're working a larger job and you have multiple gallons, don't forget as you finish with 1 gallon, you go to the next and give it a little rock to make sure you're keeping that color mixed in for even distribution of that colored product.
Commandment 11, strain your finish, or in this case, strain your sealer. So even if we've done a really good job of mixing our product, best practice, right? I want to prevent or minimize any particles that may have not got mixed up well in that jug, or if I've got any dried particles in the jug, anything at all. I want to work a fine strainer into my system. That means using the pantyhose method that you'll see at the schools, or use just paint strainer material along with the medium strainer that comes with all the products. So again, just like a professional painter is going to do, they're going to strain their paint. We want to strain our finish and sealer and just minimize anything coming out of the jug and ending up in that floor, because that's going to result in probably a repair or a spot issue then between coats.
And our final commandment, number 12, which is floor care, it really is important that you educate that homeowner as to how to maintain that floor. The last thing you want is for them to wear through that finish and wear into that color seal coat, and now you're having to do a repair, which can be pretty difficult over the years. So educating them and make sure they understand it's best to keep up with the recoats versus you having to do a resand or try to do a repair.
All right, so that's the 12 commandments. Again, as we went through them and trying to prep to do this demo and cover the subject matter, we went through all 12. We said all 12 of these are an important part of being successful with the application of these products. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the video of actually doing the application on this floor, what we did between coats, if we put a second coat down, how we handled that, the feathering. Then we'll come back, we'll handle some live Q&A. Again, get other comments and input from you guys on what are the things that you've found to be successful with these products out in the field, and then we'll wrap it up. So enjoy the video, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, so now we're finally ready to put down our sealer. We're going to put NordicSeal down on this section so we can capture on the stain section and the natural section. And when you're putting down the colored sealers, it's really not any more difficult than putting down the regular sealers. There's just a couple things that we have to pay a little more attention to. Mainly that's feathering and pouring from wet into wet and not getting a puddle out here too far when we pour our product down, risking that then we might get it set up on the edges and double up on our color. So we've also got our game plan down. We know if there's restrooms, bedrooms, any other things like that that might cause us a problem, make us stop. So we finish those out, pull the dry line. We've also checked our temperature, relative humidity, airflow. We've shaken up our product really well to make sure any of the pigments have gotten well dispersed within the product. We rinsed out our applicators, took those down to just damp. You don't want those dripping. We don't want to risk that we're going to dilute the product and especially any of those pigments and have a light area to begin with. So this is probably one of the more critical stages too when we're just doing our starting row, right? Doing our starting puddle, you really want to get going. Easier to do with 2 people, but today we've only got a single person applying and doing all the cutting in and everything, so we'll just make it work. But just remember that. I don't want to pour a puddle, have it sit here for a while, and then try to come back to it. So I'm going to pour this out. I'm also going to pour from the side like this and not straight up and down because I also want to really minimize or eliminate any splashing. So I'll pour my puddle and get going. Again, we want to get the product spread out. We'll come back and feather everything after we kind of get our initial spread here. These products tend to be, especially the NordicSeal, NaturalSeal, tend to be a little thicker. AmberSeal does also, but definitely NordicSeal and NaturalSeal, you may notice a little more of a thick consistency on these products. Again, don't get too concerned right when you're starting, you know, with some streaks or any color variations, because we're going to spend a lot of time and make sure we go back and even everything out. So I want to load up my applicator a little bit here. Then I'm going to go back and just make my feathering pass. So if I'm going under cabinets or whatever right here, that'll be fine. Get to the end. Now, whoops. That's something you want to try to avoid is splashing. I also want to make sure that I pad out in line with the grain. Especially with these products, don't pad out across the grain and risk that you're going to leave a mark there, a heavy mark. And then it all comes down to feathering and carefully feathering. So if I leave a mark like that in the floor, it's probably going to stay there. And we also want to make sure, what I'd recommend is that you cut in behind yourself and not ahead of yourself. Again, we don't want to risk that our cut-in guy cuts in 2 or 3 or 4 feet ahead of us, and then we can't get back to it soon enough with the snowplow, and then we go over it again, and now we've got a double layer of color or pigment in that area. So cut in behind yourself. And then fingertip pressure. If you want to know how to get an even coat, don't try to adjust the pressure on the applicator yourself while you're dragging it. Just make sure that you're using fingertip pressure. Let the applicator do the work. So here's a good example of, again, cutting in behind myself. And the cutting in is crucial. I want to take off like an airplane. I don't want to set this thing down into the floor really hard, pull it out, pull it directly up. I want to almost hold it up on the back side and then just bring it out, and you can see how nicely it feathers any of those marks out that I had. You also may notice sometimes when you're using a snowplow tool, you get a little bit of a heavy edge off the top, and that's just because that applicator is cutting into your previous layer that you put down. So usually they'll flow out and you don't have to be concerned about those, but if you want to, you can also just make a feathering pass and go back. So you can see now I've got these two lines kind of coming in, you know, that came off the top of the applicator. So if I want, I can take my snowplow tool, my T-bar, and just lightly set it down as I'm going, and then just pull it back across those lines to get them out of there, and then feather up when you get to the other side. Again, but we want to use, you can minimize those lines by just using fingertip pressure, but they'll usually always be there. They're there when you use them with a clear product too. They're just not as visible. Make sure you have good light to work with. And again, it's always a little more useful if you've got another set of eyes on this versus just yourself doing it. Whenever you make those feathering passes, again, just make sure that you pat out the applicator real well, because we don't want to go ahead and set it back down and then leave a heavy mark there when we're trying to take care of issues like that. So here I'm coming back with my cut-in pad to cut in behind myself. Yet I'm not worried about some of these marks and stuff when I'm putting them down with my snowplow tool, because I can come back and I can take my cut-in pad and I can easily feather those out into the floor. What you want to be careful of is the guy who's using the cut-in pad, that I'm not pressing down, you know, and one, leaving a heavy mark or a stop mark there, and that's obviously exaggerated. But a lot of times the guy who's cutting in is putting it down thinner. So I'm not setting this thing down on the full pad. I've got it just at a slight angle, just so I've got those back bristles contacting the floor lightly so that I can feather any marks out of the floor. Also, it's pretty critical that we don't stop in the middle of the floor anywhere. So if I'm coming out, if I've got, say I've got some floor outlets and I stop or try to go around them, you know, you can see how that's likely going to leave some marks in the floor. So the best thing to do would be to tape those off and just drag right over them, but then also go back and use your cut-in pad to feather any of those marks out around items like that that you've got to work around. You also notice that we are putting this down on a dark stained floor. On the labels, we don't recommend using the white tinted products on dark stained floors. It's not that you can't, it's just that it accentuates everything even more. So, but we also know it's one of the bigger trends. Again, to get an antique look is to put a dark brown stain down and then white tinted product over the top to get that antique look. So we'll leave this line here in the floor. See if these come out, if it flows out. If not, then we'll show you how we can try to do a repair on that. But you want to take your time and go slow and just do things right. If we can get the product down correctly here, it's going to make obviously everything a lot easier. We don't have to go back and do any repairs. Another key is, again, I don't want to pour my next line out here and risk that that puddle is going to set up on either side and then give me a dry line right there. So always pour your puddle wet into wet. So usually if I'm working by myself in a situation like this, I'm cutting in behind myself, and I'll go ahead and make 2 or 3 passes and then come back to both sides and make my feathering marks with my cut-in pad. You also need to think about, in a lot of houses today, right, you've got floor-to-ceiling windows, and if I happen to leave marks anywhere, where do I want to leave them? So if I've got floor-to-ceiling windows over on this side, I really want to be careful in this part of the floor that I don't leave any marks there. I'd rather pull anything over on the far side where I've just got walls to deal with and not floor-to-ceiling windows, as opposed to pulling everything up to that window and leaving my marks possibly there. So same issues when we're applying regular sealer and the colored sealers, working our way out of the room. Right, we can push-pull. Some people will even just walk in it. What I like to do is I'm going to work my way a little bit down doing S-curves and then straightening those out. Again, I want to be careful when I'm feathering that I don't leave heavy marks with the bottom of my applicator. And then every once in a while I'm going to jump out here and move my puddle that's remaining a little closer to the wall. So don't work yourself too close to the wall to start with, or you'll have a tough time getting out. So here I'm going to go ahead and cut in basically ahead of myself. But I can reach out, grab that heavy mark, come back here, pat it out. And then we're going to do our S-turns to get out of here. Man, this thing is... If I feel like I need to spread a little more product out, I can get it out there and pull it back in. And the key here is to do your very best to make sure you're getting even coverage with the product all the way across the floor. Now here I am, you'll notice I am patting out across the grain, but I know I'm going to be on that right away. So I'm reaching back to the wall and I'm barely letting it sit down and I'm pulling it back. Okay, patting out to make sure I don't have any extra, reaching back to the wall, pulling it back. So you've got to think that every time you set your applicator down, especially in this situation, am I leaving a mark in the floor? So I usually don't like to pat out or to feather by pushing away, but this may be one of those instances where it's better to do that so I don't leave heavier marks in the floor right there. So if I feather out by pushing away and making sure I have a pretty dry applicator to begin with, I can take care of those marks before they set up on me. So then I just make another little quick run just to move my puddle a little closer to the wall. Some guys even prefer then to just walk in the product. So they'll walk all the way down just to make sure they don't leave any applicator marks on their last pass. That's up to you, whatever your method is. If it works for you and working your way out of the room and you're not leaving marks and getting an even application rate, then keep on doing it. So again, to prevent heavy marks on this, I want to feather away from myself. Again, I'm patting out to make sure I don't have extra product underneath. And I'm not pushing this down into the floor. I'm just basically letting it float on top so that I'm not getting then a thin mark as I'm trying to avoid heavy marks. Now, this is also not the place, usually if you've got a clear sealer and you're working your way out and you've got a little extra when you come to your stopping point, you might take this and just spread this out into the floor. I do not want to do that here because then I'm going to be doubling, tripling, quadrupling the amount of color in just that spot. So you can have something set up. Usually I like to use my cut-in pad and just a garbage can at the end. And you can soak up the extra, slough it off on the edge of the trash can, make sure it's your own trash can, and then pick up the extra like that. All right, so one thing we want to talk about right before we put NordicSeal down is just, again, temperature, relative humidity, and airflow. You'll see right now we've got about 36% relative humidity, about 70 degrees here in Denver. So not ideal conditions. I'd like it a little cooler if possible, a little more humid if possible too, but we know that's kind of what we're going to get here. So that's why it's more important to make sure I've cut off my airflow, because if I've got warm air and dry air moving across the floor, then it's going to dry even faster. So think about how you can control those variables. So is there a way I could get more humidity in the air? Probably not. Is there a way I could make the air cooler? I could turn on the AC if I have that available and then turn that off right before I start applying. And then how can I turn off and adjust the airflow? So those three critical variables we want to adjust first before we start messing with anything with the finish. Another thing is just application rate. When we talk about feathering and using fingertip pressure on the applicator, Any water-based sealer or finish that's about 30 to 35% solids, when you put it on at 500 square feet per gallon, you get about 1 mil of thickness left when it's dry. So that's 1/1000th of an inch, or about as thick as a piece of copy paper. So that's why we say just use fingertip pressure. Don't try to mash the sealer or whatever into the floor, or thin to win, or whatever your motto is there. Just use the applicator, let the applicator do the work, use fingertip pressure. Your goal is to apply it as evenly as possible, and just letting the applicator float across the floor is going to do it a lot better than you trying to manipulate the pressure on that applicator. All right? So let's go ahead and put our NordicSeal down. Again, with these products, we do recommend just T-barring and cut-in pad. I prefer to do everything else with a roller, and I know you can roll these too. A lot of guys are very successful even putting them down with the roller. But again, if we're trying to focus on best practices and what most people will have success with, it's going to be putting it down with a T-bar. All right, so now we're down to our last colored product, colored sealer, AmberSeal. This product I think has been around for about 10 years. I don't know, time flies so fast. I'm not sure exactly when we released this product, but it shouldn't be new to anybody. But because it's one of the colored sealers, we wanted to include it. And same watch outs. I mean, you still don't want to leave stop-start marks, heavy marks, thin marks, because it does have some amber pigment to it, and those will tend to show up just like they will with the products that have the white pigment in them. Now this on top of a stained floor, especially a brown stained floor, is going to be a very typical application for AmberSeal because it does give a lot of nice pop, maybe a little richer tone to your brown tone stains. And then also when we use it over on the natural side, a lot of people like to use it there to give their water-based finish a little more of that oil look without actually having to even put an oil sealer or a stain on the floor. So both of these are going to be very typical applications for AmberSeal, but again, just a lot of the same watch outs as far as we're going to cut in behind ourselves, we're going to run the whole length of the floor. If we think we got a heavy mark coming off the top of the T-bar, we can go do a feathering pass. So all the same things. All right, let's go ahead and get it put down. So again, you can see now that we're putting down all three of the sealers that it doesn't really matter which one we're putting down. Basically, our application method is the same, even if we were putting down a clear sealer. There's just certain parts of it that we want to be a little more cognizant of and be thinking about while we're putting the product down. Otherwise, everything stays the same. So don't make it too complicated for yourself, but definitely think about some of the, the places in the floor, rooms, certain layouts that may cause you an issue with certain products as you're putting them down. So same here, I'm gonna S-turn my way out. I'm gonna pat out. Again, I'm just holding the applicator up on the surface of the floor. I like to think of it just contacting the very top of that surface and not necessarily trying to drag a whole bunch of product back with me because I don't want to put it down too thin, differently than the rest of the floor. So I find if I get a nice spread on it, go ahead and pat out, reach out, and again, I don't want to clunk it down. I just want to reach out, and I always start pulling it back even before it touches the floor. To bring it back in a nice feathering motion. So now we've come back, we've given this first coat its proper dry time, we put some extra airflow on it. We want to make sure it's good and dry before we come back and try to do anything else with it. Now usually our process, right, in the classes we talk about, hey, if we can do a really good job prepping the floor, get everything nice and smooth, minimize or eliminate grain raise, we want to put down sealer coats and then not abrade. However, as a best practice, when you're working with any of these colored sealers, we would recommend that you come back and abrade and then do a wet tack so that you can see any issues that might be kind of hidden. Because a lot of times the sealer, it flowed out and you can kind of see, especially on the dark area, some streaks, maybe some heavy marks, maybe even a few light marks. But on the natural area, it's much more difficult to see. But we still want to get those areas and address them if we need to. And just abrading it might be fine. But we want to see those, take care of them, because if we don't before we put our coats of finish on, then it's too late. Then we've locked everything under those clear coats of finish. Much more difficult to go back now and try to correct those. So we would recommend, as a best practice, go back, lightly abrade the floor, wet tack it to have any issues pop up so you can take care of them now, either before we put on another coat of sealer to try to even things out if needed, or we put on our finish coats. And here's your choices. So it may be that you just need 1 or 2 maroon pads stacked on top of each other. That's going to be our softest, least aggressive method. But in looking at your floor, and it may depend again on, are you on a natural floor? Did you use NaturalSeal, NordicSeal, AmberSeal? Can you already see some issues? If you think you need to be a little bit more aggressive, then you can always add 1 or 2 Bona diamonds, and you can add them like such. 180 or 240 grit would be fine, and we're going to go quick. We're just really trying to use our abrasion not to grind anything off the floor. Remember, we've only got at most 1 mil of thickness from this sealer coat. So we don't want to be real aggressive. We're not trying to take anything off. We're just trying to blend things and smooth things out, either before we put our finish coats on or before we put the next coat of sealer on. And the main reason we're doing it is to, 1, smooth the floor, yes, but really to bring out those issues that might be hard to find and see. We want to bring those out with our wet tack so we can take care of them now, okay? So we're going to go ahead and abrade the whole floor. I'm actually only going to use 1 diamond on 2 stacked maroon pads for this floor. Okay, a couple things before we turn the buffer on. 1, remember that we're just trying to lightly blend in the top. So we want to run the buffer where it's floating. Also remember where your cut point is, more towards the back, and where your lighter feathering point is, towards the front. So we're going to want to run this machine back and forth in a backwards motion, okay? And don't get to the point where you're trying to heel it on anything. We'll do that in a couple spots, but remember, we've only got 1 mil of sealer down, and it's going to be pretty easy if we put a hip into this thing that we're going to do what's called a burn through, and that's really what we're trying to avoid. So one thing we're going to look at right now is on NaturalSeal or NordicSeal, if it's a natural floor, no stain, we're not working on a dark species, it can be really hard to pick up your miss marks after you abrade it. So that's why we go back and do the wet tack. So I went ahead and created some fake burn throughs, and it's easy to see because I know where they're at. But if I've got a whole house and I'm trying to just find them in the house, it's going to be a lot harder if I'm just trying to do it visually. So you'll see when we do the wet tack and we pull the tack mop over the top, those are going to show up, but you got to be looking for them too. So you can't just be tacking and not paying attention. You got to look for and make sure you're trying to find any of those burn through marks. All right? So you can see once I pull over it where I'm back down to bare wood, it turns darker and shows that oak coming through again. And this is on top of the NordicSeal. That's why, like I said, it may take a little bit for that to show up, but you'll see that darker wood show through, especially on top of something like NordicSeal that has so much pigment in it. So again, take your time, maybe have somebody watching while you're tacking, wet tacking, just to be looking for those misses and those burn throughs. So now our sealer is dried. We've gone ahead and we abraded it, we did our repairs, we're ready to put on that second coat. But you know, during our schools, we're always talking about what did you learn? You should learn something on every job and make sure you write it down so that you can, 1, share it with your other employees, colleagues, technicians. and so you remember it. So we've learned a couple things working through the best practices on this floor, and one of them is definitely the abrasion helps blend everything out. So as we were working through this floor, I thought maybe I didn't abrade it enough, because we say work quick, work fast, work smooth, but you also want to make sure that you do abrade it enough, because that really helps blend everything out. So I did go through and abrade everything one more time with our same setup. So we had 2 stacked maroon pads, we had 2 diamond 240 grit discs on there, and I think it really helped even everything out by going through and abrading it one more time. The other thing is, before abrasion, so after you put down your sealer coat, that's really the best time to look for and correct heavy marks, even streaks, stuff like that. We found out that after you abrade, those are really hard to see. They're still there, and they may show up then when you put your finish coats on, but go ahead and take care of those while you still have that sheen of the sealer to help highlight those things. Because again, once you abrade, those are going to be really difficult to correct. Also with streaks in the floor. You know, when we're doing our application with the T-bar, again, you naturally get, not product coming over the top. If you have that, then you're not applying it right. But you naturally get that little heavy mark that forms at the top of the T-bar applicator, and definitely make your feathering pass to take those out. Again, we found streaks in the floor, and trying to take those out later are probably one of the most difficult repairs to try to do and not have it still show up. And then lastly is an exit plan. So whether you're working out of a long hallway or you're working, you're working down your wall in your room, we know how hard it is sometimes to do that and keep everything nice and smooth, not have your puddle set up. So one thing you might even try is to go ahead and pull a dry line. So let's say if this is my wall, I'd work up to maybe this board, and then I'm going to take my cut-in pad and I'm going to pull up the rest of my puddle, or I'm going to make sure my puddle runs out about right here. I'm going to take my cut-in pad and I'm going to pull it right down this board seam. So I'm going to have a dry line. Basically, I'm going to have my own little transition area that I made. Some guys may even take blue tape, tape off that board seam, and then work up to it, pull the tape, and then again, you still have your dry line. That way then I can go down to my end wall and I can work all the way down, and I don't have to worry about my puddle being here. I don't have to worry about the edges setting up. That's going to be probably the hardest thing during application, is just your exit. I mean, it usually is anyway, whether with finish or with other sealers, but definitely with the colored sealers, you may want to pull a dry line as opposed to trying to mess around with that puddle. So those are the things that we learned on this job, the things we're adding to our journal, the things that we'll share with our product management team, tech team, sales team, and sharing it with you guys. Now we're ready to apply our second coat. 2 reasons you may want to put on a second coat. One is just to help even everything out. So we found that, if you put down a first coat on, especially on certain species, the product may look a little blotchy, a little uneven, and that's regardless of whether it's AmberSeal, NordicSeal, NaturalSeal, even regular sealers. So we may want to put down a second coat just to try to even everything out. The other reason is you may have done your sample that way and you did 2 coats of the sealer to add more color, because it's definitely going to do that. So you may want to do a second coat of sealer just to add more of that color to the floor, but make sure that's what your customer is expecting and that's the sample that they signed off on. It's also a discussion if you're just doing a second coat to try to make it look more even. Again, depending on which sealer you're using, you may need to have that discussion with the homeowner that you have to put on a second coat of sealer. It's going to add a little more color. Make sure they're okay with that. So one area we're going to talk about is during our abrasion is right next to the wall. So if you remember during the video, if you saw me come by the wall, then I might come down a little bit with the buffer, move back up, and then go across. Or sometimes I even came all the way down with the buffer to make sure I was getting close as possible to the wall. Big mistake, don't do that. because anytime that I dwell just a little bit extra in one spot, and because of the cut point of the buffer, it's going to take off more of the color. So now I've got a path of lighter color here that goes all the way across right there from that backside of my buffer, taking off a little more of the color. So when you're abrading, come up to the wall, come down, and then immediately go back. Don't dwell here at all, or that's what you're going to have to then try to fix. Hey, one other area I wanted to talk about was cutting in. So especially on this, you know, if you're working on a dark floor or something a little more difficult, because I didn't see it over on the natural, the unstained side, but when you're cutting in and using the T-bar, what I would do is get as close to the wall as you can with your T-bar, and then only cut in a little bit here. If you cut in out here, you know, and try to feather out way out into the floor, what I saw after the first coat was, you know, a little more color throughout this than where I was T-barring. Now it went away after the second coat on the dark side, and I didn't see it at all on the lighter side, on the natural side. But just a note of caution, again, and that's one of the things you really have to watch out for, is a difference in application rate between your cut-in pad and your T-bar. So if we can keep the majority of the floor just with the T-bar, and just along our edges here is where I'm going to just do a short little cut-in to feather that out, I think that's perfect. And make sure that you don't leave too much there with your T-bar either. Otherwise, you'll just be feathering out, you know, a darker bar of white onto the floor. All right, so this is the area where we had left our T-bar mark out into the floor, our heavy mark. And we sanded and scraped this area right here back down, but we left the heavy mark over on this side. It's really hard to find this mark still in the floor. We knew it was over this area of darker grain, so we could find it. And it's still visible if you really know what you're looking for, but for the most part where we scraped it down, it looks fine now. It's going to be much less discernible, much harder for the homeowner or floor owner to find and be concerned about. But definitely over where we didn't take that heavy mark down, it's still there and it jumps out a little more. So again, when you first put your sealer down, look for any heavy marks, try to take those down right then. Don't wait till you abrade, because then it's a lot harder to find them. But for the most part, that ended up being a good repair. So this is the area where we had the miss, right in this area. So when we applied our first coat, completely missed this, and we had a big mess throughout here. So we treated both of these like stain repairs. We took our sandpaper. I didn't have heavy marks on this one, so just took our sandpaper, chased the grain out a little bit, took our maroon pad, chased it out a little more to feather that out into the floor, and then took some more AmberSeal and brushed that out and feathered it out to chase the grain as well. That repair came out great. Same on this side, we had a much bigger mess over here. I had some heavy marks coming cross grain, so we made sure we took the scraper and took those down just a little bit. Then we took again our sandpaper, chased the grain with that, took our maroon pad, chased it, feathered it a little more with that, brushed on another coat, and then when we put the second layer of AmberSeal on this side, all of that came through great. This side looks excellent. Over here where we just had the single coat, so we again treated it as a stain repair, brushed on another coat, feathered it out, and this area looks great. But of course where we didn't touch it, everything is still there and shows through. So the note is, after you put your sealer coats on, look for any repairs that you need to take care of. Heavy marks, thin marks, misses, cross grain, turn marks, anything that you might think you need to repair that's going to show through. If you ever ask yourself the question, I wonder if that's going to show through, it's probably going to show through. So go ahead, take a little time to at least mute it, mute the effects of it, if you're not taking it all the way out, and treat everything as a stain repair. Okay, so now we're back to our streaks in the floor. And we're showing it on the dark side just because that's where they're really going to show up. So we tried to do a repair where we did a single coat, where we were going to do an additional coat. You can still see both of them. And the real point to this is, during your application, go ahead and make those feathering passes to take out any of those top streaks. It's very difficult after the fact, especially if you're working on a darker stained floor, or you're working on a dark species and you're trying to put this product on, it's going to be real hard to get those streaks and stuff out of the floor. So you can see on the single side that I just tried to soften that up, but I actually went down, I'm back down to the stain in spots, so now that brown tone is completely showing through. Although I did soften the streak a little bit, it still doesn't matter, I can still really see it. On the side where we put an additional coat over the top, I can still see it. Yeah, we did soften it. Yes, the second coat did help. But I don't even think you need to be a professional and know what you're looking for. To me, that stands out pretty sharply. So again, the point is not on repairing streaks, but preventing streaks. So during your application, as you see those streaks kind of appearing, go ahead, pat out, make your feathering pass to eliminate those streaks during the application. You won't have to worry about doing any repairs. So now we're going to look at our burn-through marks that we had from our abrasion step. And we left them, we didn't do a repair on these just because we wanted to have a good example of what they're going to look like if you don't take care of them. So again, you may have 1 in the floor, you may have 200 in the floor if you're not careful with your abrasion. And it's important again to go with that wet tack to make these show up. So on the NaturalSeal side, it's actually pretty difficult to see in this example because mainly it goes across some of the darker grain. So even though you've got that natural white oak color kind of showing through, it is a little more difficult if you were just walking through a job to pick up on this one. If it was on a little plainer cut board and something with a little more even color to it, it might be harder to pick up. But the one on our NordicSeal floor definitely pops out, mainly because we've got that contrast of more white pigment in the NordicSeal, and it definitely makes it easier to see. So in repairing these, as we find these in the floor, what we would have done is, again, treat it just like that stain repair. So we could take our, maybe lightly scraping, but probably just our sandpaper, 120 grit or whatever you finished with. Sandpaper, slightly chase the grain with that. Chase the grain with your maroon pad a little bit. Take a little bit of the sealer, pour it in those areas, and then take your fine brush and feather that out into the floor, even chasing the grain a little bit with that sealer touch-up application. And those should be completely unnoticeable then if you treat them like that. All right, so just one last note on the outcome of our floors here. On the natural unstained side, you can see that everything came out beautiful. Whether it's NordicSeal, NaturalSeal, AmberSeal, all the products really easy to use, whether we're doing a single coat, double coats. We still want to follow those best practices. We still want to make our feathering passes to get rid of any top streaks that may form. You still want to watch out for heavy marks, light marks, misses, anything that you would do even if you were putting down a regular clear sealer too. But you can see on this side of the floor, everything came out really great. And this is the normal application that we see people using these products for, especially for that Nordic Scandinavian look is, you know, NaturalSeal 1 or 2 coats or NordicSeal 1 or 2 coats, covering it with clear coats. You can see the beautiful results that you can get. All right, so now we're here on the darker side of the floor, either to represent working on a darker species or like we did here to use one of the brown tone stains, this being Bona Antique Brown. So the point here is not that you might necessarily want your floor to look like this or the homeowner would want it to look like this, but they might. So if that's one of the options, you know, you've got these options to use. Obviously the AmberSeal, very regular application for this product to give some more pop, more vibrancy, give it a little darker tone by adding that amber tone to a brown toned wood stain. On NordicSeal and NaturalSeal, again, it's one way that you can get a slight antiquing look or really wash out a total stain color by using 2 coats of NordicSeal. I would definitely say adding 2 coats, especially when you're using it over a darker floor like this, makes everything a lot more even, but it also doubles that color. So again, the point is know what products you're using, know if they have pigment or not in them, know what your watch-outs might be during application, or make sure that the homeowner knows what the final look of the floor is going to be.
Thank you for sticking around for the live Q&A session. At this point, you've heard explanations on the 12 commandments and why those commandments are important when it comes to putting down a seal coat. You've also was able to watch the video that demonstrated different tips and tricks and techniques on how to put down these seal coats. So if you didn't get a chance to put your questions in during the video, now is a good time to send in your questions so that we can answer those questions for you. So I'm going to go to the first question we have. It was recommended to never coat NordicSeal over a brown stained floor. And you're right. I mean, it's probably not recommended, but if it's a look that your customer would like to have on their floor, it is compatible. It will stick. But as we'll see on the floor here, and Todd will give you an overview on the NordicSeal being put on the darker species or darker stained floor.
Yeah, actually, it's a good question and a good observation. And like Dee said, it's not that you can't do it. And this isn't necessarily just to represent a brown tone stained floor, but even a darker species, like if somebody wanted to put it on Brazilian cherry or Ipe, American walnut, something like that that was real dark, just to know what you're getting. So, you know, everything's going to stand out more because you've got that sharp contrast between the white pigments in those sealers and the darkness of the stain or the species. So again, the point was not that we were suggesting you go out and try to do this and that a lot of people want their floor this way. Just know the products that you have. What are you putting down? What kind of effect is it going to have on it? And, you know, for that effect where people want it to kind of get that antique look, we really think that probably the craft oil system would be better to get that look and then coat that with finish if they want it protected to that length anyway. You know, putting down one of the brown tones in the craft oil, then putting the white over that will give you more of this, you know, slightly washed out effect. And then if you want that real striking antique look, that's when you bring in the wire brush, then put your brown tone down of craft oil and then the frost over that. And that's where that frost really sticks down just into that soft grain to give you that really big contrast between the dark and the light. So we didn't do this side necessarily to say, hey, go ahead and put it over brown tones. It's a great idea. But just to show as an example of know what you're getting, know how it's going to react, and know how to talk to your customer about it. All right, back to you, Dee.
Our next question is, can you use a Bona power scrubber after abrasion to pick up all the fine dust, or is wet tacking enough? Yes, the power scrubber can be used to pick up that fine dust or intercoat abrasion, especially if you're using a diamond abrasive, which tends to create a real fine talcum type powder. So that power scrubber with just water in it would be a good technique to use to make sure you're getting up all that fine dust. Whereas wet tack, you may have to wet tack several times. So power scrubber would be a good use for that. And our next question is, did you have anything you want to add about the tacking? Yeah. Good. All righty. Next question is, man, John, what are you doing to me with all these sentences? I know, John, that's why I'm joking. So it says, can you add or use NaturalSeal or NordicSeal after you apply a coat if you see a miss or an area that needs to be feathered? And what he guesses question really is, can you apply a sealer in between finish coats if you see a problem that you didn't address before your first coat of finish? And I would say sealer is designed to really go onto the raw wood and soak into the raw wood. I guess my personal opinion, and I'll let Todd kind of explain too, if you do any kind of abrasion on the finish coat, I really do feel that the sealer will stick to the finish, but it's really important to try to take care of that on the seal coat. So, you know, if you have finish already over the seal coat, it'll probably be like doing a stain repair at that point where you'd want to feather it. You know, with stain, if you're trying to put stain and you have finish that's lightly abraded, now you can cause somewhat of a halo. So that could be the risk. But with both products being water-based, you could have a chance of having success, but I honestly say I haven't, you know, tried anything like that. But Todd's gonna talk about a couple repairs over here.
Yeah, so I don't have a repair here that we can show, but I think because, like Dee said, because the sealers actually sit up on top, that color is not soaking down into the wood, that you probably would have success. Again, just taking some sandpaper, maybe 120 grit diamond, maybe chasing the grain a little bit like that over the top of where you would actually miss. I mean, to me, it would be worth the try versus trying to get all the way back down into the wood, and really treating it like a stain repair. To go ahead and kind of blend that off, put a little sealer down, use a nice brush, and make sure you get the whole area covered that you need to. And then again, chase the grain with that brush and the product sealer, whether it's NordicSeal, NaturalSeal, whatever you're trying to do the repair with, and just chase that grain out with the brush too, just to help it blend in. The nice thing is that hopefully you don't have these all over the floor. It's just in one spot. It's going to dry pretty quick, 10, 15 minutes, where you're going to be able to see if it's going to show or not. Then I'd probably take a maroon pad. If you think, hey, it looks pretty good, I think it's going to blend fine. Take a maroon pad, maybe just hit the edges real quick. And I think then when you put your finish over the top, everything should be good. But I think you have a good chance of that working, because it doesn't soak into the floor, it sits up on top. All right, I hope that answered your question. Back to you, Dee.
All righty, our next question is, if you have a very heavy sealer spot and the abrasives are not working, I'm assuming when you're buffing the floor to try to get the heavy spot out, if that's not working, would you suggest scraping? And if so, what tools and how would you do that? So doing a repair on a heavy seal spot, your goal is to try to take that film build thickness down so that it's even. And we'll go over here because Todd has a couple examples to show you.
Yeah, so I don't think we didn't show it in this video because it was shortened, but we'll have a full length sealers video coming out. So in this area right here, we had exactly that. I have some misses, I've got heavy spots coming across here. And I also have the same thing down here. So again, any time that you have an issue with any of these colored sealers, treat it like a stain repair. So, we chased the grain out here. I especially made sure that I scraped hard across any of those heavy spots like this that were coming across. Then even chased the grain out a little bit. Then we went back with the final grit that we stopped with, which was 120 black. Again, chase the grain out a little bit with this. Make sure you go back over any of your scraper marks too, right? To make sure you get any of those edges out of the floor. Then I even softened it up a little more. You could do that with, say, Diamond 120. I like to use the maroon pad. And again, going out into the grain a little bit more, really in this area where we did this repair. And then I poured a little more sealer down after vacuuming up the dust. Poured a little more down, and then again, took a nice paintbrush and spread that product out on the repair, chased the grain out a little bit with the edges of that brush, and everything came out just fine. You can see if I didn't do that, the heavy marks are still going to show through, and they'll probably even gain a little more color as the wood gets darker, as it ages and oxidizes, versus being a freshly sanded surface. So treat it like a stain repair, scrape it down to bare wood, chase that grain with your paper, and then with a maroon pad, put some product back down, and then even feather that back out with your paintbrush, and you should be good to go. All right, back to you, Dee.
All righty, and anytime you're doing a repair, it's always best practice to take a dampened rag and wipe that over the repair area once it dries, and that'll give you the impression of finish going over the floor. And if you see that the repair is not noticeable once you take a dampened rag over the floor, then once you put finish over that repaired area that you're good to go. Next question, can NordicSeal be diluted with another stain to drop the amount of pigment? And then I think he corrected himself. He meant, because of course oil and water doesn't mix well. His question is, can you take another sealer and dilute the NordicSeal, with another sealer? So I would say NordicSeal and NaturalSeal, they're kind of built off that same platform to where you could mix those two sealers, but taking a different sealer like an IntenseSeal, a classic seal, definitely wouldn't recommend, or even an AmberSeal. I mean, each sealer, for the most part, is somewhat different, with the exception of NordicSeal and NaturalSeal just having a different percentage of white pigment in the floor. But I would highly recommend not mixing in IntenseSeal. IntenseSeal and AmberSeal could possibly be mixed, you know, but once you start mixing your seal coats and you come up with a different color variation, now you have to remember what that ratio was in case you're having to do any type of repair. So be careful of that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit onto that. The only other thing I can think that, you know, if anything would come to mind, it would be IntenseSeal and mixing that with Nordic and Natural Seal, but because Classic Seal is a completely different type of base, so I wouldn't even chance that. IntenseSeal, though, you got to remember, because of the way that product is built and the pH level and stuff, you might actually have, it's meant to react with the extractives and stuff in the wood, and again, pull those specific colors out of the floor. So I wouldn't want to do that when I'm dealing with something with a white sealer. So I would say with, you know, with NordicSeal, if you want to thin that out, just go with NaturalSeal, because you can see here that 2 coats of NaturalSeal are equal to 1 coat of the NordicSeal. The single coat of NaturalSeals obviously just gives you that really light white undertone. But I just wouldn't mess with the NordicSeal. I would go to NaturalSeal first, put multiple coats of that on. If you want, if you're stuck in a situation, I don't think there's anything else we can recommend, because I wouldn't mix it with IntenseSeal and I wouldn't mix it with Classic Seal. All right, back to D for the next question.
Next question is, under ideal circumstances, what is the dry time difference between water-based sealers and the dry fast sealer? It says dry fast stain sealer, but I'm thinking it's dry fast sealer. So your water-based sealers are going to dry in about 2 to 3 hours under ideal conditions, temperature and relative humidity. The higher the temperature, the lower the humidity, the seal coat's going to dry a lot faster. Whereas the lower the temperature and the higher the humidity, you'll probably have a little bit more open time. The dry fast sealer, you know, because it goes down thin at about 500 to 600 square feet per gallon, and it's an oil-based product, it actually dries, or should dry, I should say, because I know we've gotten plenty of calls where, depending on what region a person may be in, it may take a little longer to dry, but it should dry in about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And I've seen that happen here in our climate, in Colorado, being a very dry climate. So 2 to 3 hours for your water-based seal coats, and depending on temperature, relative humidity, and airflow really plays a big role with the oil-based sealer. If you put down a dry fast sealer and you shut that house up nice and tight, so you kind of cause a greenhouse effect where you get a solvent rain going on, it's just saturated with solvent, it could take that dry fast sealer a lot longer to dry, or depending on your application method. Some guys that tend to put it on with a lamb's wool, or if they're T-barring it, which is, I mean, you can use a T-bar, but a lamb's wool could probably put it down a lot heavier. A nice 3/16 mohair blend roller is probably the best technique. Make sure you put it down nice and even, a thin, even consistency, because it goes down to 600 to 700 square feet per gallon. So at that rate, and with the correct environment, you should have that drying in about two hours, if not 1.5 hours. Next question is, if you apply 2 coats of sealer, would you buff after the first coat or wait till the second coat? When it comes to the water-based sealers, you only have to abrade between coats for 2 reasons. One, for smoothness, or if it's been more than 48 hours. So that's going to depend on, you know, those 2 conditions. If it's been more than 48 hours, then you have to abrade that first coat. If it turns out nice and smooth, then you can put the second coat right over the first coat. And just as an added info, 2 coats of finish is always recommended no matter how many seal coats you use. All right. And when it comes to the abrasion, I'm going to send it over to Todd, and he can kind of talk about what abrasion we would recommend on your water-based seal coats.
Yeah, especially with NordicSeal and NaturalSeal, we really do recommend abrading in between coats of that one, because it just helps blend it out and smooth out some of the issues. You get on the natural side, even though I would recommend going through with at least a couple maroon pads, a couple 180 or 240 diamonds, just to, you know, ease your mind a little bit and know that you're going through real light, you're blending everything together, you're smoothing out some of the issues. Just make sure you don't put a hip into it. But definitely on the darker side here, before we actually went through and abraded it, I mean, the streaks were even worse, cut-in marks were even worse. So blending, we know from just looking at this side, even helps out on this side, make everything turn out nicer. So I would definitely recommend as a best practice, abrading between coats with when you're using NordicSeal, NaturalSeal, even AmberSeal, and just be soft with it. So a couple maroon pads, 180 or 240 grit diamonds, wet tack that to make any issues. If you did happen to put a hip into it somewhere or you have a miss, that wet tacking will help bring that out, because that brown tone from whatever you have underneath will shoot up through those white layers. So hope that helps, and we'll take it back to D.
All righty. Next question is, can you apply 3 coats of Bona NordigSeal? And if so, how long of dry time in between? So when it comes to putting down 3 coats of any product, we would highly recommend you have a pinless moisture meter. It's important that you know where your baseline moisture content is in the wood. And that way, after your first coat, you allow it to dry, you can apply a second coat. But before you consider a third coat, it's important that you take a moisture reading and you're within a point or two of where your baseline reading was on your wood. Otherwise, if you start putting too much product on the floor, then you can have some other issues, like introducing too much moisture to that wood, and you can have it kind of peaking on the edges. So our recommendation, if you're not using a pinless moisture meter, you should probably stick to only 2 coats of product in a day, and then wait the third day. I mean, and I say if you had to push it because you're way out in Timbuktu somewhere, if you get those first 2 coats on early enough in the day and you wait as late as you can, at the end of the day, you may be okay, but it's always best to have that pinless moisture meter. So you never want to have to resand a job because of some issues.
Yeah, the other reason why we want to make sure you use a moisture meter, a dual depth pinless, is so that you can make sure that your sealer is really dry before you get back on it with the buffer and the braid. Even though we're being soft with the conditioning pads and the diamonds, if I get on it when it's a little too wet, even in one area, I don't want to start ripping stuff off there, smearing things. It makes repairs and stuff a lot more difficult, and it makes it more difficult on your abrasives to actually help out smooth things. So make sure everything's really dry. So 2 coats in a day, not a problem. Doing the third coat as long as you're using the moisture meter. And then in between coats, once you've had 15-20 minutes where it's been down, go ahead and put a box fan across it. Once you've had good flow and leveling to help that drying and make sure it gets good and dry. If you're really going to try to push 3 coats in a day, even if you're using the moisture meter, put that box fan on there just to introduce some good ground level airflow to get things dried up. And then color wise, again, 1 coat of NaturalSeal, 2 coats of NaturalSeal, 1 coat of Nordic, 2 coats of Nordic. If I do 3, I could do 3, I could do 4. You can just keep layering them on there. But one caution we have there is, it's kind of like if you've ever done any sport glazes. It's nice because you get that color and tone that you want, but you still have the grain show up through. Once I start getting 3-4 coats of especially something like NordicSeal, I'm going to start really washing out that grain and losing that effect of it being a hardwood floor. So that would be I guess the only caution on putting multiple coats on of especially NordicSeal, is you don't want to get that fake plasticky look where now it's really washing out the grain so much that you can't tell it's wood anymore. Other than that, yeah, 2-3 coats in a day, multiple coats of either product, you should be fine. Thanks, and back to Dee for the next question.
All righty, so this concludes our webinar for today. I really appreciate you guys sticking around and sending in your questions. We also wanted to hear from you on any techniques or tips that you have for putting these products down. So feel free to contact us at ustech@bona.com if you'd like to send in some, if you have other questions or would like to send in some of your tips and tricks. Also, we have our e-learning platform, which you're more than welcome to go to and continue learning some of the different products that we have. And you can always give us a call at 1-800-872-5515, and you can ask for the tech and training department or reach out to your TMs as well. We're always looking forward to answering those questions, and anything we can do to help you be successful, then that helps us to be successful. So thanks for tuning in.